I knew something was wrong before I even saw her face. The crystalline arch at the main gate of the Valoran Military Academy had been humming at a steady pitch all morning, scanning each new cadet as they passed through on the first day of the intake cycle. I had been standing at my log terminal for 3 hours, cataloging species, entry clearances, and shuttle registrations as part of my second-year administrative rotation. It was the most boring assignment the Academy offered, and I had drawn it for the 4th time in a row because nobody bothered to reassign a Sithari who never complained. My name is Ren Valis. I am unremarkable by every standard this Academy measures. I come from a mid-tier reptilian species that produces competent engineers and forgettable officers. I do not have claws worth fearing, venom worth respecting, or a political faction worth courting. What I do have is a talent for being invisible, which means I see everything that happens in the spaces between important people. And what I saw that morning at the gate changed the way I understood the entire galaxy. The new cadets arrived in clusters, organized by species delegation. The Draelith came first, tall and thin, with silver-white skin that caught the station light like polished metal. Their delegation leader walked at the front with the practiced confidence of someone who had been told since birth that his species was destined for greatness. Behind him, 6 cadets moved in perfect formation, each carrying equipment cases stamped with their homeworld's military insignia. I logged them, verified their biometric scans, and flagged one whose medical clearance had an expired certification. Standard procedure. Then the Orani, short and dense, their 4 legs clicking against the entry ramp in perfect unison. They moved like a single organism, each member adjusting their pace to maintain exact spacing. The Vethkai arrived next with military precision, their insectoid faces betraying nothing, their mandibles sealed in the expression that their species used for every occasion, from funerals to celebrations. I cataloged each group, noted their clearance levels, checked their shuttles against the docking manifest, and moved on. Standard morning. Then Torin Gale stepped into my line of sight, and the comfortable rhythm of the day cracked down the middle. Torin was Makori. If you have never seen a Makori in person, let me describe the experience. Imagine the largest predator your world has ever produced. Then give it 4 arms, dense plating across the shoulders and spine, and a jaw that could crush a structural beam. Now give it a personality, shaped entirely by the knowledge that nothing in any room it enters can physically challenge it. That was Torin. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, and every inch of him communicated a single message. I am above you. I have always been above you. And you will remember that every time you see me. He was not a new cadet. He was in my year. Technically, though he had failed his conduct reviews twice and been held back once. His continued enrollment was a financial arrangement, not an academic one. The Makori Dominion funded an entire wing of the Academy, the Advanced Combat Simulation Center that bore their species emblem above its doors. Expelling Torin would cost the institution more than tolerating him ever would, and everyone knew it. He knew it best of all. That morning, Torin had positioned himself near the gate arch, leaning against the wall with 2 of his arms crossed, and the other 2 hanging loose at his sides. He was not on duty. He was not assigned to the gate. He was there because he liked watching new cadets flinch as they passed him. I had seen him do this before. Most species gave him a wide berth, lowered their eyes, and walked faster. It fed something in him, and he came back for it every intake cycle like clockwork. I logged another Orani shuttle, and was about to check my terminal's power reserve when a ship appeared on the docking scanner that I did not recognize. It carried no concordance military markings, no species banner, no diplomatic seal. The registry code that came through was short and unadorned, just a serial number and a point of origin I had never seen before. My terminal flagged it as verified, but offered no additional data. In 4 rotations at this gate, logging thousands of arrivals from every corner of concordant space, I had never once seen an entry populate with nothing but a serial number and a green light. Every ship that docked at this station told a story in its registration data. This one was blank. The shuttle docked at the far end of the arrivals platform. Its hatch opened, and a single figure stepped out. She was human. I had never seen one in person. Most of the Academy had never seen one in person. Humans were a recent contact species, filed in our concordance databases, under a classification I had always found oddly vague. Provisional member, restricted interaction. I knew almost nothing about them beyond the basics. Bipedal, endoskeletal, Carbon-based. One pair of arms, one pair of legs. Soft outer tissue with no natural armor or weaponry. Their file in the Academy reference library was thinner than the entry for most microorganism colonies. She was young, even by what I understood of human aging. Average height for her species, which made her small by the standards of almost everyone present. She had dark hair pulled back from her face, and she carried a single bag over one shoulder. She wore no cadet uniform, just plain dark clothing that could have belonged to any civilian on any station in the sector. Nothing about her appearance suggested military training, diplomatic importance, or threat. She walked toward the gate arch with an unhurried stride. Calm, measured. Her eyes moved across the plaza, the way a person scans a room they have already memorized from a blueprint. Not searching, confirming. I saw the moment Torin noticed her. His head turned first, a predator reflex tracking unfamiliar movement. Then his posture shifted. He unfolded his upper arms and straightened to his full height. A smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that made smaller cadets change direction in hallways, the kind of smile that preceded humiliation. He stepped directly into the gate threshold and blocked the archway. The human girl stopped 3 paces from him. She looked up. The size difference was almost comical. Her head barely reached the center of his chest. His shadow covered her completely, and the light from the crystalline arch framed him from behind like some dark monument. Torin spoke loudly enough for the entire plaza to hear. Wrong station, soft skin. This is a military academy, not a refugee intake center. Whatever little world you crawled off of, the shuttle back leaves in 10 minutes. I suggest you get on it. A few cadets near the gate laughed. Others watched in silence. A Dralith cadet turned away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. An Orani delegation leader glanced toward the administration building, then looked at the ground. I kept my eyes on my terminal, but my attention locked on the scene unfolding 10 meters in front of me. The girl did not respond. She did not step back. She did not look away from Torin's face. She simply stood there and waited, as though he were a door that had not yet finished opening. Torin leaned closer. Did you not hear me? This is the Valoran Military Academy. We train officers here, real officers, from real species. Whatever you are, you do not belong at this gate. The girl tilted her head slightly. She still said nothing. Something about the way she held Torin's gaze made me uneasy, in a way I could not immediately explain. She was not afraid. That much was obvious. But it was more than that. She was not performing courage. She was not summoning defiance. She was simply standing in front of a creature 3 times her size, with the settled patience of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome of this encounter, and dismissed them all as manageable. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Fast footsteps. Running. I turned and saw Senior Instructor Drenva Cole sprinting from the administration building. I need to stop here and explain something about Cole, because what happened next will not make sense without context. Drenva Cole was Vethkai, an insectoid species known for composure under pressure. Cole had served in 3 border conflicts, received 2 valor commendations, and spent 20 years training cadets at this academy. I had never seen Cole move faster than a measured, deliberate walk. Not during emergency drills. Not during the hull breach scare last year, when a micrometeor punched through the observation deck's secondary shielding. Not when a Dralith cadet accidentally discharged a plasma cutter in the training bay and set a wall on fire. Cole did not rush. Cole did not panic. Cole occupied every moment with the absolute certainty that whatever was happening could be handled at the speed Cole chose to handle it. Cole was running. The instructor crossed the plaza in seconds, closed the distance to the gate, and physically pulled Torin aside with both hands. Torin stumbled, more from surprise than force, and his forearms swung wide for balance. Before he could react, before he could say a single word, Cole turned to the human girl. What happened next? I will remember for the rest of my life. Cole bowed, not a casual nod of acknowledgement, not the shallow dip that instructors gave to visiting officials from minor delegations. Cole performed the old form. It was a bow I had only read about in protocol manuals, a gesture so deeply formal that it was reserved exclusively for diplomatic equals or superior officers of flag rank. Cole's upper body folded forward at a precise angle, mandibles tucked, eyes lowered. The bow lasted a full 3 seconds. Cadet Ellison, Cole said, voice steady, but carrying an undertone I had never heard from this instructor before. On behalf of the Valoran Military Academy, I offer my sincerest apology for the conduct you have just experienced. It does not represent this institution, and it will be addressed. Please allow me to escort you to your quarters. Cole reached down and picked up the girl's bag before she could respond. Then the instructor turned and led her through the gate, walking beside her with the careful attentiveness of a junior officer escorting a visiting admiral. The plaza went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that fills a space when every person in it simultaneously realizes they have witnessed something they do not understand. Torin stood frozen beside the archway, one arm still half raised from when Cole had shoved him aside. His mouth was open. No sound came out. Around the plaza, cadets stared at each other with expressions that all asked the same question: what just happened? I turned back to my terminal. My hands were steady, but my pulse was not. The girl's entry data had populated on my log screen while I was watching Cole's bow. Cadet Mara Ellison. Species: human. Clearance: Commandant level directed mission. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, because I was certain the system had made an error. Commandant level directed mission was not a standard clearance tier for cadets. I had never seen it used for a cadet. I was not even sure it could be used for a cadet. It was a classification reserved for individuals whose presence at the academy had been personally authorized by the commandant, bypassing every standard review board, species evaluation committee, and intake assessment protocol. For a first-year student. From a species that had never sent a single candidate to this academy. From a species that most of us could not have identified by sight. I saved the log entry and looked up. Across the plaza, Cole had disappeared into the administration corridor with the human girl. The cadets who had witnessed the scene were beginning to move again, slowly, quietly, the way people move when they are not sure the ground beneath them is stable. Torin Gale still stood by the gate. He had lowered his arm. His expression had changed from confusion to something harder, something that looked like the first seeds of humiliation taking root in soil that had never held them before. But it was not Torin's face that stayed with me as I finished my shift that morning. It was Cole's. In the brief moment between escorting the girl through the gate and disappearing into the corridor, the instructor had glanced back, just once, a single look directed at Torin over one angular shoulder. It was not anger, it was not disapproval. I had seen both of those from Cole before, and they carried a cold precision that left no room for doubt. This was different. This was fear. Not fear of what Torin had done to the girl, fear of what the girl's people might do about it. I closed my terminal, logged my shift completion, and walked back to my quarters with a single thought repeating in my mind. Who are the humans, and what does the Academy know about them that the rest of us do not? That question would take me less than a week to answer, and the answer would change everything I believed about power, about strength, and about the quiet girl who had walked through the gate without saying a word. The next morning I arrived at my first lecture of the new cycle and stopped in the doorway. The seating arrangement had been restructured overnight. In a hall built to accommodate 200 cadets across curved tiers, Mara Ellison sat in the second row, third seat from the center aisle. That seat should have been flanked by other cadets. It was not. A 2-seat radius around her was completely empty. No bags, no data pads, no signs of anyone who had been there and moved. The seats had simply been left vacant, as though an invisible barrier surrounded her. Word about the gate incident had spread through the academy overnight, but the version circulating was not the one I had witnessed. Nobody was talking about a bully picking on a new student. They were talking about a senior instructor, the most unshakable faculty member in the institution, sprinting across the entry plaza and bowing to a first-year cadet like she was a fleet admiral. The story had transformed in the retelling, picking up weight and strangeness with each repetition. Some versions claimed Cole had actually trembled during the bow. Others said the commandant herself had been watching from a window above the plaza. One particularly creative retelling insisted that the human girl had said something to Torin that made him physically recoil, though I knew from direct observation that she had not spoken a single word. The question on everyone's tongue was not what happened, it was why. I made a decision that I can only describe as curiosity overriding every survival instinct I possessed. I walked down the aisle, past the empty seats, and took a position one row behind Mara Ellison, slightly to her left. From this distance I could study her without being obvious about it. She was physically unremarkable by the standards of galactic military cadets. No claws, no venom glands, no exoskeletal plating, no bioluminescent threat displays. Her skin was smooth, her frame was slender, and her hands, resting on a plain datapad, had short nails and no visible calluses. If I had been cataloging species by threat index, I would have ranked her somewhere between a Veely librarian and a potted fern. She took notes during the lecture, clean, organized notations that she entered with quick, precise keystrokes. She did not fidget. She did not glance around the room to see who was watching her, even though at least 30 cadets were doing exactly that. She listened to Senior Instructor ApoHFY deliver a standard overview of fleet supply chain doctrine, with the focused attention of someone who considered every word worth recording. 40 minutes into the session, she raised her hand and asked a single question. In a decentralized command structure, where primary supply lines have been severed, what threshold of autonomous resupply authority do individual commanders have before requiring fleet-level approval? It was a good question. A technically sound, operationally relevant question that demonstrated an understanding of fleet logistics most first-year cadets would not develop for months. The phrasing alone told me she had studied this subject before arriving, but what struck me was not the question itself. It was the way Instructor ApoHFY answered it. ApoHFY was a blunt, impatient lecturer who treated student questions like interruptions to his actual job. He routinely dismissed inquiries with one-line responses and moved on without checking whether the student had understood. I had once watched him tell a Draelith cadet to reread the assigned material, rather than waste class time on questions the readings already addressed. He was efficient, effective, and entirely uninterested in hand-holding. When Mara spoke, ApoHFY paused. He turned his full body to face her, which he never did for student questions, because it required pivoting on 4 legs, and he considered the movement undignified. He delivered a careful, detailed 3-minute answer that addressed her question from multiple doctrinal angles, cited 2 historical case studies, and concluded by recommending additional reading material that he said she might find particularly relevant. He spoke to her the way he spoke to visiting officers during review sessions, with respect, with consideration, with an undertone of caution that had nothing to do with pedagogy and everything to do with knowing who you are talking to. After the lecture ended and the hall emptied, I tracked Torin Gale's movements through the Academy's public schedule board. He was at midday combat drills, and he was not being quiet about his opinions. I positioned myself in the observation gallery above the drill floor, a spot I used frequently, because no one ever looked up. Torin stood at the center of a group of 4 cadets from Predator-class species, his voice pitched to carry across the entire training space. Cole panicked over nothing, he said, slamming a training staff against the mat for emphasis. The impact echoed off the high ceiling. Humans are a novelty species. They have no fleet presence in the Concordance, no registered warships in joint exercises, no combat history against anyone that matters. The Academy is bending itself in half for a political stunt, and the rest of you are too soft to see it. One of the cadets, a Draelith named Sevran, nodded along eagerly. My delegation leader said the same thing. Humans were admitted through back channels. It is all politics. The Concordance Council likes to announce new member species at their annual summits, because it makes them look progressive. A human cadet at Valoran gives them something to point to. Torin pointed the training staff at the far wall as though it were the gate plaza. She is a placeholder, a token, something the Concordance Council can hold up and say, "Look how inclusive we are." And Cole humiliated me, humiliated a Makori, to protect the feelings of a placeholder. That will not stand. A younger Makori cadet, one of 2 others from Torin's species at the Academy, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Disagreeing with Torin openly was not something anyone at this institution did without consequences. I half agreed with him. At least, the rational part of me did. The evidence supported Torin's reading. I returned to my quarters that evening and used my gate log access to search the Academy's public records on humanity. What I found confirmed Torin's argument, and then immediately destroyed it. The public files were thin. Humanity's homeworld was called Earth. They occupied a single star system. First official contact with the Concordance had occurred 12 standard cycles ago. Their species profile listed basic biological data: warm-blooded, omnivorous, average lifespan of 70 to 90 local years, moderate physical resilience, no registered fleet size, no published military doctrine, no recorded engagements with any concordant species. The file was not just thin, it was empty in a way that felt deliberate. Every other species in the concordance database had pages of military assessments, diplomatic profiles, economic analyses, and cultural briefs. The Orani entry alone ran to 47 subsections. Humanity's file read like someone had written a paragraph and then classified everything else. The absence of information was, by itself, information. Someone had decided that what the galaxy knew about humans should be as close to nothing as possible, and that decision had been made at a level high enough to enforce it across the entire concordance database. I dug deeper. My gate log credentials gave me limited access to the Academy's administrative records, not classified material, but internal memos, enrollment histories, and process logs that regular cadets could not reach. I searched for Mara Ellison's admission file. What I found made me sit back in my chair. Her admission had not been processed through the standard species intake board. Every other cadet at this academy, regardless of species, regardless of political connections, regardless of how much funding their homeworld contributed, went through the board. It was the single universal gateway, a review committee that evaluated academic records, physical assessments, psychological profiles, and species-level diplomatic standing before approving or denying enrollment. Mara Ellison had bypassed the board entirely. Her admission was authorized by a single signature, Commandant Yevra Sol. Commandant Sol had not personally approved a cadet admission in 19 years. The last time she had done so was for the heir of a Vethkai military dynasty, a candidate so politically significant that the board's involvement would have created a diplomatic incident. Before that, there were no records of Sol exercising direct admission authority at all. The commandant's signature on an enrollment file was rarer than a combat deployment order. And then I found the attachment, a file linked to Mara's admission record, classification locked so that I could not open its contents, but the header was visible. Concordance Security Council Advisory, Human Integration Protocol. A Security Council Advisory, for one cadet. The Concordance Security Council dealt with existential threats, interspecies conflicts, and strategic military policy at the highest levels of galactic governance. It did not involve itself in academy admissions. It did not issue advisories about individual students. The idea was absurd, like finding a planetary defense order attached to a library card application. I searched further and found something that made the absurdity even worse. The same advisory had been sent to 3 other military academies across concordant space. Each had been offered a human cadet for enrollment. Each had declined. The reasons for their refusals were not recorded in my accessible files, but the pattern was clear. 3 institutions had looked at whatever the Security Council was offering and decided they did not want the responsibility. Valoran had not declined, but I found a notation in the administrative log that made it clear the decision was not voluntary. The advisory had been structured as an invitation, but the legal language beneath it carried the weight of a placement order. The Concordance Security Council had told the Academy that a human was coming, and the Academy's only real choice was how gracefully it accepted. I closed the files and stared at my darkened terminal. Outside my quarters, the station hummed with the constant vibration of its orbital mechanics, a sound so constant that most residents stopped hearing it within their first week. I heard it now. It sounded different. It sounded like the station was holding its breath. Everything I had found pointed in one direction, and it was not the direction Torin believed. This was not politics. This was not a token gesture. The Concordance had not admitted a human to be polite. The Concordance had placed a human at this academy because something about humanity required the highest levels of galactic authority to manage. I should have stopped there. I should have closed my terminal, gone to sleep, and treated Mara Ellison as just another cadet, whose background was none of my concern. But my quarters were on the same corridor as the faculty wing, and as I walked past Cole's door on my way to the sanitation block, I heard voices. Cole was arguing with someone over a secure communications channel. The door muffled most of the conversation, but I caught fragments as I slowed my pace to a crawl. Cole's voice came through first, clipped and frustrated. The Macquarie cadet's family will file a pride loss claim. If the Dominion pushes it through formal channels, The Academy will be forced to convene a disciplinary hearing, and the human cadet will be called to testify. That puts her in a public adversarial proceeding within her first week. The diplomatic implications alone could set back everything we have been building. The response came from a voice I did not recognize. It was calm, measured, and carried no accent I could place. Instructor Cole, I appreciate your concern for institutional procedure, but I want to be very clear about something. You should be far less concerned with Macquarie pride, and far more concerned with what happens if the human files a complaint. Silence. Then Cole's voice, quieter now. The Macquarie Dominion is a founding member of the Concordance. Their political influence is substantial. And humanity has been a provisional member for 12 cycles, the voice replied. Yet here we are, with a Security Council advisory attached to a single cadet's enrollment file. Ask yourself why that might be, instructor. Ask yourself what kind of species earns that level of attention in 12 years. The line went dead. I stood in the corridor, motionless, for longer than I should have. Then I walked back to my quarters and did not sleep for a very long time. The question I had asked myself at the gate was still unanswered. Who are the humans? But now it had a companion question, one that felt heavier with every hour that passed. What are the humans that an entire galactic government is afraid of offending them? A week passed. Mara Ellison moved through the Academy like water through a filtration system, present everywhere, noticed constantly, and affecting nothing in a way that could be directly measured. She attended every lecture, completed every assignment, and participated in every drill without distinction. Her academic performance was competent, but not exceptional. Her physical assessments placed her in the middle of the pack, outperforming some species in endurance tests but falling behind the larger predator-class cadets in raw strength metrics. She ate alone in the refectory, spoke only when addressed, and spent her evenings in the study hall with her plain datapad and a focus that never wavered. She had not mentioned the gate incident. Not once. Not to other cadets, not to faculty. Not in any formal report. Torrin Gale had publicly humiliated a new student in front of the entire arriving class, and the student in question had responded by simply continuing with her day as though it had not happened. I did not know whether to read that as grace, indifference, or something else entirely, something more strategic than either. But the faculty had not moved on, and that was what kept me watching. Every senior instructor at the Academy found a reason to pass through whatever room Mara occupied during that first week. It was subtle enough that most cadets would not have noticed, but I noticed everything, because noticing things was the only skill I had that mattered. Cole appeared in the back of her tactical theory lecture twice, despite having no role in that course. Instructor Pell lingered after his own sessions, watching Mara pack her datapad with an expression that mixed academic interest with something closer to wariness. The Academy's combat training supervisor, a massive Orani named Grenthal who rarely left the training floor, was spotted in the academic wing 3 times that week, always within one corridor of wherever Mara happened to be. Even the medical staff seemed involved. I saw the Academy's chief physician pass through the combat training observation gallery during Mara's scheduled physical conditioning block, take 2 minutes of notes on a handheld device, and leave without speaking to anyone. The physician had no reason to be in that gallery. Physical conditioning was supervised by training staff, not medical personnel, unless the medical staff had been asked to observe, unless someone wanted a clinical assessment of the human's physical capabilities that went beyond what standard testing could measure. They were not monitoring her performance. They were assessing her, the way a munitions team assesses an unfamiliar device before deciding whether it is safe to transport. The first genuine crack in the Academy's careful management of Mara Ellison's presence came during the tactical simulation exercises at the end of that week. The simulation lab was the Academy's crown jewel, a vast spherical chamber lined with holographic projectors that could render any fleet engagement scenario in 3-dimensional real time. Cadets were divided into teams of 4, each assigned a squadron of simulated warships to command through a scripted battle scenario. The exercise was designed to test basic tactical instincts, threat assessment, resource management, and adaptive response under pressure. For most first-year cadets, it was their first exposure to the complexity of fleet combat, and the results were usually messy, chaotic, and heavily reliant on brute force tactics. Mara was assigned to lead a 4-ship defensive squadron tasked with protecting a supply convoy against a raiding force. It was a minor role within the larger scenario. The main action centered on two larger fleets clashing over a contested jump point, while the convoy protection assignment existed primarily to give weaker teams something manageable to handle. Most cadets treated it as a secondary objective, a box to check while the real competition played out elsewhere. Mara did not treat it as secondary. I was in the observation gallery, watching through the transparent upper wall of the simulation sphere. From this vantage point, I could see every team's movements rendered as colored light formations against the dark backdrop of simulated space. Most teams were doing what first-year teams always did, clustering their ships in defensive formations around their assigned objectives and reacting to threats as they appeared. It was instinctive and predictable. Mara's squadron moved differently. Within 30 seconds of the scenario's activation, she restructured her 4 ships from the standard diamond formation into a pattern I had never seen in any tactical manual in the Academy's library. 2 ships pulled ahead and separated to extreme flanking positions, far wider than any defensive doctrine would recommend. The remaining 2 dropped behind the convoy in a staggered trail, leaving gaps in the defensive perimeter large enough to fly a cruiser through. It looked wrong. It looked like she had deliberately broken her defensive line. Several cadets in the gallery pointed and whispered, and I heard a Macquarie second-year mutter that the human did not even understand basic formation theory. The simulated enemy raiding force attacked on schedule, a group of 6 fast attack vessels dropping out of simulated warp on a direct intercept course for the convoy. Every other convoy defense team in the scenario's history had responded to this moment by tightening formation, presenting a united front, and absorbing the initial attack wave. Mara did the opposite. Her flanking ships did not move toward the convoy. They moved toward the enemy's rear, while the 6 attack vessels committed to their assault run, focused entirely on the convoy and the 2 trailing defenders. Mara's flankers slipped into the narrow cones behind each ship's drive array, where active scanning was weakest. Sensor blind spots. Every ship had them, and every tactical doctrine in the concordance acknowledged their existence, but treated them as minor vulnerabilities in chaotic combat. Mara treated them as doorways. Her flankers targeted the 2 vessels at the back of the formation, not the fighters, not the ships closest to the convoy, not the biggest or most heavily armed, the 2 ships at the back. I did not understand the choice until both targets dissolved into static on the display. They were the command ships. The 2 vessels coordinating the attack run carried the enemy formation's tactical network relays. Without them, the remaining 4 attack ships lost synchronized targeting data, formation coherence, and coordinated maneuvering capability within seconds. The formation did not just weaken, it disintegrated. 4 ships that had been operating as a single coordinated predator suddenly became 4 individual actors, each making independent decisions based on incomplete information, each drifting out of position as they tried to compensate for inputs that were no longer coming. Mara's trailing ships then advanced through the disorganized remnants and picked them apart one by one, exploiting the gaps in their now fragmented formation, with strikes that were precise, economical, and devastatingly efficient. No wasted energy, no dramatic maneuvers, just systematic elimination, like a technician disconnecting components from a circuit board. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. Her convoy took 0 losses. 0. Every cargo module intact, every escort ship functional. The simulated enemy force eliminated completely, and the only damage to Mara's squadron was cosmetic scoring on the hull of 1 flanking ship, from a stray debris field generated by one of the exploding command vessels. I looked around the gallery. The Macquarie second year who had mocked her formation was no longer talking. He was leaning forward in his seat, his jaw plates sealed tight, staring at the display with an intensity that had nothing to do with casual observation, and everything to do with the sudden, uncomfortable realization that he had just witnessed something he could not dismiss. No other team in the session came close. The next best convoy defense team lost 2 ships and a third of their convoy's cargo modules. The team after that lost their entire squadron. The average performance across all teams was roughly 50% casualties. The simulation instructor, a compact Irani officer named Veth, whose 4 legs barely brought him to chest height on most cadets, replayed Mara's maneuvers on the main display after the exercise concluded. Every cadet in the room watched the colored light formations trace her strategy in slow motion. The flanking maneuver. The blind spot penetration. The surgical elimination of command infrastructure. The methodical destruction of the leaderless remainder. Veth turned to Mara. His voice was flat, professional, but I could hear the tension underneath it. Cadet Ellison. Identify the doctrine you employed in this engagement. Mara stood at her station with her hands clasped behind her back. Decapitation sequencing, she said. Her voice was calm, conversational, as though she were describing a recipe rather than a combat methodology. You identify the enemy's command and coordination nodes and eliminate them before engaging the main body of the force. Without centralized direction, a numerically superior force fragments into individual actors with no shared tactical awareness. Individual actors are predictable. Predictable targets are easy to isolate and neutralize. Where did you study this doctrine? Veth asked. It is standard curriculum on Earth, Mara said. We begin learning the fundamentals at approximately age 12. The room went quiet, not the startled silence of the gate plaza, a deeper silence, the silence of 200 cadets from dozens of species simultaneously processing the implication that a species they had dismissed as a novelty taught fleet-level combat theory to children. Instructor Veth's face did not change expression, because Orani faces were not built for expression. But his 4 legs shifted in a rapid pattern I recognized as extreme agitation, the equivalent of a human pacing back and forth. He turned to his terminal and typed something rapidly, his back to the cadets, his leg movements still cycling through that agitated rhythm. I later heard from a faculty aide that Veth had submitted an urgent report to the commandant that same evening. The report's subject line, visible in the administrative log I should not have been checking, read, Reassessment of Human Tactical Training Baseline Required. The tactical simulation made Mara visible in a way that the gate incident had not. The gate incident had been about the Academy's reaction to her presence. The simulation was about Mara herself, about what she could do, about the depth of knowledge she carried so casually that she did not even realize it was extraordinary. And it made Torin Gale furious in a way that the gate incident had not. At the gate, he had been embarrassed by Cole. In the simulation, he had been outperformed by the person he had dismissed. The first was humiliation by authority. The second was humiliation by evidence. I did not witness what happened next directly. I reconstructed it from the corridor's surveillance records, which I accessed through my administrative credentials 3 hours after the fact. The footage was clean and unambiguous. Torin intercepted Mara in a secondary corridor on the residential level, 40 minutes after the simulation ended. The corridor was narrow, designed for utility access rather than foot traffic, and it was empty except for the 2 of them. Torin had positioned himself at the far end, blocking the only exit that did not require Mara to backtrack through 2 security doors. He spoke first. That simulation was rigged. The scenario parameters were weighted in your favor. No soft skin outperforms Makori tactical instinct in a fair engagement. Mara stopped walking. She looked up at him, with the same unhurried calm she had shown at the gate. It was not rigged. The scenario parameters were identical for every team. Your team lost 2 ships and 19% of your convoy's mass. You can review the data yourself. Torin stepped closer. His upper pair of arms spread wide, a Makori dominance display that made him look even larger in the confined space. His lower arms clenched at his sides, the muscles beneath his plating visibly taut. You do not speak to me about data. You do not speak to me at all. You are here because your species begged the Concordance to let you play at being soldiers. I am here because my species built this academy. Your species funded a building, Mara said. That is not the same thing. Torin moved fast. One of his upper arms slammed against the wall beside Mara's head, close enough that his plated forearm occupied the space where her skull had been a half-second earlier. She had not flinched. She had not moved at all. His arm was beside her head, because she was already standing exactly where she intended to stand. Move your hand, she said. Torin leaned closer, his jaw plates apart just enough to expose the rows of grinding teeth behind them. Make me. Mara reached up with her right hand, gripped Torin's wrist, and applied pressure. I watched the footage 3 times and still could not identify exactly what she did. It was not a grab. It was not a twist. It was something precise, targeted at a specific junction in his wrist, where the plating overlapped and the underlying joint structure was exposed. Whatever she did, Torin's body reacted immediately, and without his consent. His knees buckled, his upper body twisted toward the point of contact. He dropped to one knee, and his other 3 arms swung uselessly, as his balance collapsed around the single joint that Mara controlled. She held the grip for exactly 2 seconds. Then she released him, stepped around his kneeling form, and walked down the corridor without looking back. She did not run. She did not hurry. She walked at the same unhurried pace she used for everything, as though she had just opened a door that was slightly stuck, and continued on her way. Torin remained on one knee for 6 seconds after she released him. When he stood, he looked at his wrist, turning it slowly under the corridor light. Then he looked down the empty corridor where Mara had disappeared. Then he did something I had never seen a Makori do in my 2 years at this academy. He looked afraid. I found out about the faculty's response before the corridor footage even finished processing in the security archive. Cole and 2 other senior instructors had accessed the surveillance feed in real time from the faculty monitoring station. They had watched the entire encounter as it happened. They had not intervened. Now they were reviewing the footage again, not to determine what had happened, but to confirm who initiated physical contact. The answer was obvious. Torin had moved first. Torin had blocked the corridor. Torin had placed his arm beside Mara's head in a clear act of physical intimidation. Every frame supported the same conclusion. Cole submitted a formal incident report within the hour, but not to the Academy's disciplinary board. The report went directly to the Concordance Security Council, a formal incident report about a hallway confrontation between 2 cadets, escalated past every internal authority, and sent to the highest governing body in the galaxy. The disproportionality was staggering. It was like reporting a shoving match to a planetary defense command. Unless the shoving match involved someone whose species required that level of oversight. Unless the people watching the footage knew something about the human girl that made a hallway confrontation between cadets a matter of galactic security. That night, I sat in my quarters and searched the Concordance's public archive for anything I could find about human military history. The search returned almost nothing. The files were either sealed, classified, or simply non-existent. Humanity's public profile in the Concordance database remained a near-empty shell, a species entry with demographics and biology, but no strategic assessment, no threat analysis, no military capability summary. But I am patient, and I am thorough, and empty databases have edges where information leaks through. I found it in a Trade Commission footnote, a single line from a Concordance Scout's first contact report, filed 12 standard cycles ago during the initial survey of human space. The report itself was classified, but the footnote had been included in a public trade route assessment as a sourcing reference. Whoever compiled the trade document had not realized what they were citing. The line read, "Recommend immediate classification of humanity as a Tier 1 strategic concern. This species has not known a single generation without internal war. They do not merely understand conflict, they have perfected it." The report had been filed by a senior Concordance scout named Dareth Yon, a 30-year veteran of first contact operations whose assessments had never been overruled in his entire career. This one was overruled. The recommendation for Tier 1 classification was rejected by the Concordance Council on the grounds that a single system species, with no faster-than-light military presence, did not meet the threshold for strategic concern. The override was later rescinded. I read the notation 3 times to make sure I understood what it meant. Rescinded meant the Council had changed its mind. Rescinded meant someone had looked at the evidence again, after the initial political decision to downgrade the assessment, and decided that the veteran scout had been right all along. Humanity was a Tier 1 concern, the highest threat classification the Concordance maintained. And they had sent a single girl to the Academy. I turned off my terminal and lay in the dark for a long time. Outside my window, the stars turned slowly as the station completed its orbital rotation. Somewhere on this station, Mara Ellison was in her quarters, and I wondered what she thought about before she slept, whether she carried the weight of what she represented, or whether it was so natural to her that she did not feel it at all. In the morning, I would go back to my lectures, my drills, my gate log duties. I would watch Mara Ellison walk through the Academy's corridors with her unhurried stride and her calm, measuring eyes. And I would carry the knowledge of that single footnote like a stone in my chest. They have perfected it. I was beginning to understand why Cole had been running. Torin's confinement lasted exactly 2 days before external pressure cracked it open. The Macquarie Dominion, the political body that governed Torin's species and funded a significant portion of this academy's infrastructure, filed a formal diplomatic protest with the Valoran administration. The document accused the academy of permitting physical assault against a Macquarie citizen by a member of an unvetted species and demanded Mara Ellison's immediate removal from the enrollment roster. The protest was not quiet. It was not a private communication between diplomats and administrators working through back channels with careful language and plausible deniability. It arrived accompanied by a Macquarie diplomatic frigate that dropped out of faster-than-light transit and positioned itself within visual range of the Academy station. 1,200 meters of dark, angular hull, bristling with weapons arrays that lined its forward sections like teeth in a predator's jaw, holding stationary orbit less than 50 kilometers from the campus. I stood on the observation deck on the station's upper ring and watched it through the panoramic viewport. Around me, cadets from a dozen species gathered in small clusters, speaking in lowered voices. The mood had shifted overnight. For the past week, the tension around Mara Ellison had been academic, rumors and speculation, and a general sense of unease that could be managed by avoiding certain corridors and certain conversations. Now there was a warship visible through the window, and the unease had a physical shape, a shape with plasma batteries. A Dralith cadet named Lon, who had the misfortune of being assigned to my study group because no one else would take him, appeared beside me, with the expression of someone who had been waiting for an audience. "That is a Kareth-class command frigate," he said, because Lon believed that identifying military vessels in casual conversation made him sound important. Standard armament includes 4 forward plasma batteries, 2 torpedo arrays, and a full electronic warfare suite. Crew complement of 400. The Macquarie are not sending a message. They are making a statement. I said nothing. I was watching the frigate's running lights pulse in the slow, rhythmic pattern that indicated active weapons standby. Not powered up, not targeting anything, but ready to power up, ready to target. The Macquarie had brought a loaded weapon to a student dispute, and they wanted everyone on this station to see it through their windows and understand what it meant. In the faculty corridors below, the administrative machinery of the academy was grinding at full speed. I knew this because my gate log credentials gave me access to the internal communications summary, a daily digest of non-classified administrative traffic that nobody important enough to lock me out of ever remembered existed. The digest was a flood of urgent messages between department heads, legal advisors, and the commandant's office. 3 separate instructors had filed formal concerns about the frigate's proximity to the station. The Academy's legal counsel had issued a memo on the Concordance's rules of engagement for diplomatic vessels near educational installations. The quartermaster had quietly doubled the station's emergency supply reserves, which was the kind of detail that told you more about the real situation than any official statement. And then Commandant Yevra Sol made her first public appearance since the intake cycle began. Sol was ancient, even by Vethkai standards. She had commanded fleet elements in 2 interstellar conflicts, served on the Concordance Admiralty Board for a decade, and accepted the position of Academy Commandant as what most assumed was a quiet end to a distinguished career. She moved slowly, her exoskeletal joints clicking with each measured step, and she spoke with the soft precision of someone who had learned long ago that volume was unnecessary when authority was absolute. She addressed the assembled senior cadets and faculty in the main hall, standing at the central podium without notes, without aids, without any of the ceremonial trappings that usually accompanied formal academy addresses. "I will be brief," she said. "The Macquarie Dominion has filed a formal protest regarding events involving 2 cadets at this institution. The protest has been received and will be addressed through appropriate diplomatic channels. Cadet Ellison remains enrolled. Her status is not subject to negotiation, amendment, or review." She paused. Her compound eyes swept the hall, and I had the unsettling sensation that she was looking at each of us individually, filing our faces and our reactions into some internal catalog that she would reference later. "Furthermore," she continued, "any further incidents of harassment, intimidation, or unauthorized confrontation directed at any cadet, regardless of species, will result in immediate and permanent expulsion. This applies universally. It applies regardless of the expelled party's species affiliation, political connections, or financial contributions to this institution." The last sentence landed like a controlled detonation. Everyone in the room understood what it meant. Torin Gale's immunity, the unspoken protection that his species' funding had always provided, had just been publicly revoked. But Solti was not finished. "I accepted this posting because I was asked to," she said, and her voice dropped half a register, which for a Vethkai was the equivalent of leaning forward across a table. "I was asked by the Concordance Security Council, I was asked by the Concordance Admiralty, and I was asked by my own judgment, which has served me through 40 years of service, and which I trust more than any political consideration that has ever crossed my desk. Cadet Ellison is here because humanity was invited, and I will remind every individual in this hall of something that appears to have been forgotten in the excitement of the past week. Humanity did not ask to be invited. We pursued them. We lobbied for their inclusion in the Concordance for 7 years. 7 years of diplomatic effort, cultural exchange missions, and security assessments. If any among you believe that a species we begged to join us should be treated as lesser upon arrival, I invite you to review exactly why we were begging." Silence. Complete, ringing silence. 200 cadets and 30 faculty members sat motionless while the commandant's words settled into the room. Sol stepped away from the podium and left through the rear exit without waiting for questions, responses, or applause. Her departure was as controlled as her address, each step measured, each click of her joints carrying the same weight as her words. I remained in my seat for several minutes after the hall emptied. We pursued them. We lobbied, we begged. The Concordance had begged. The largest interstellar governing body in known space, representing hundreds of species and thousands of worlds, had spent 7 years begging a single system species to join. That was not how the Concordance operated. The Concordance did not beg, unless it was pursuing something it could not afford to lose. I found Mara, after the assembly, by a coincidence I had carefully engineered. She was walking alone, as always. I fell into step beside her. She glanced at me, recognition flickering briefly in her eyes. She had noticed me sitting behind her in lectures. She noticed everything, I was beginning to realize, in the same quiet, comprehensive way that I noticed everything. "Are you all right?" I asked. "I am fine," she said. Her voice was even, untroubled. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been building behind my teeth since the observation deck. "The Makori frigate. Does it concern you?" Mara looked at me for a long moment, not with suspicion or wariness, with something closer to assessment, the way she had looked at Torin at the gate, measuring the situation before deciding how to respond. "There are 6 human ships within response range of this station right now," she said. "They have been there since I arrived. You cannot see them because they do not want to be seen." I stared at her. She held my gaze without blinking, and I understood that she was not bluffing. She was not exaggerating. She was stating a fact with the same calm precision she used to answer questions in lecture halls. "How is that possible?" I managed. "The Academy's sensor arrays cover this entire orbital zone. Long-range detection would flag any vessel within 100,000 kilometers." Mara almost smiled. It was the first time I had seen anything close to amusement on her face, and it lasted barely a second. "Check the sensor calibration logs," she said. "I think you will find something interesting." Then she nodded to me, a small, polite gesture, and turned down the corridor toward her quarters. I checked the sensor logs that evening. She was right. The Academy's deep-range sensor array had been recalibrated the same day Mara arrived. The adjustment was buried in a routine maintenance entry, the kind of notation that would never draw attention unless someone was specifically looking for it. The effective detection range of the array had been reduced by 40%, not disabled, not shut down, just quietly dialed back, the way you might lower the volume on a receiver to avoid hearing something you were not supposed to hear. I could not determine who authorized the recalibration. The maintenance entry was signed by the Academy's technical staff, but the order code attached to it did not match any internal authorization format I recognized. It came from outside the Academy. Someone with the authority to modify a military installation's sensor capability had reached into the Valoran station's systems and narrowed its eyes, and they had done it so cleanly that nobody had noticed. 6 ships, invisible, waiting. The Makori had brought 1 frigate and called it a show of force. Humanity had brought 6 ships and told no one, because they did not need anyone to know. The next morning, Torin Gale was released from his quarters. He emerged with the rigid posture and hard eyes of someone who has been humiliated in private and plans to reclaim his dignity in public. The Macquarie frigate still hung in visual range of the station, and its presence seemed to reinforce something in Torin, a conviction that his species still held the balance of power. He found Mara in the training arena at midday. The arena was the Academy's dedicated space for sanctioned physical combat exercises, a circular floor surrounded by tiered observation seating. When Torin walked in, there were perhaps 40 cadets present for routine conditioning. By the time he spoke, word had traveled, and twice that many had gathered. "I am invoking the right of sanctioned challenge," he said, his voice filling the space. "Under Academy combat regulations, any cadet may challenge another to a supervised sparring match. If you decline, Cadet Ellison, it will be noted in the official record, and everyone here will know that the human who lectures about combat theory cannot back it up when the stakes are real." Mara looked at Torin from across the arena floor. She was still on one knee from a stretching position, and the size disparity between them was staggering. He was a fortress of muscle and plating. She was a girl in training clothes. "I accept," she said. Within 10 minutes, the observation tiers were packed. Cole appeared at the arena's edge, took a position near the officiating station, and did not sit down. The instructor's hands were clasped behind his back, so tightly that I could see the tendons standing out beneath the exoskeletal plates. Cole looked like someone watching a fuse burn toward something inevitable. The arena filled to capacity within the hour. Every cadet who could leave their assigned duties was present. Faculty appeared in the upper galleries. The Macquarie frigate was visible through the arena's upper viewport, a dark silhouette against the stars, as though the Dominion itself had come to watch its champion perform. Mara Ellison stood at the center of the arena floor. She had removed her boots and stood barefoot on the composite surface. Her feet were positioned shoulder-width apart, her knees slightly bent, her hands open at her sides. The stance was low, balanced, and absolutely still. She did not bounce on her toes, did not roll her shoulders, did not crack her knuckles, or shake out her hands, or perform any of the pre-combat rituals I had seen from dozens of species. She simply stood there, settled, centered, ready, as though her body had known this moment was coming, and had finished preparing for it long before she entered the room. Torin stood at the opposite edge, his forearms hung loose, his plated shoulders rolled forward, and his jaw plates were apart, exposing the edges of his grinding teeth. The Macquarie combat stance was not subtle. It was designed to communicate overwhelming physical superiority before the first strike landed. The officiating instructor, a wiry Draelith named Sereth, confirmed the rules. No weapons, no strikes to primary sensory organs, no lethal force. Victory by submission, ring out, or official stoppage. Both parties acknowledged. Sereth dropped his hand. The match began. Torin charged. He crossed the arena floor in 4 strides, his speed shocking for his mass. The Macquarie were apex predators, engineered by evolution for explosive bursts of power, and Torin was the largest Macquarie in the Academy. He led with his lower arms extended for a grapple, his upper arms positioned to sweep inward and trap whatever his lower arms caught. It was a classic Macquarie engagement pattern. Close distance, establish grip, use superior mass and limb count to overwhelm. Against any species in the Academy, it would have worked. Against most species in the Concordance, it would have ended the fight. Mara did not retreat. She shifted. Her body moved 2 degrees to the left, just enough to slide outside the arc of Torin's lower arms, the way a leaf slides past a falling stone without being touched. As his momentum carried him past the space she had occupied a half-second earlier, her right hand snapped forward and struck a point beneath his forward left arm, where the heavy shoulder plating met the softer tissue of the joint. Torin's left arm spasmed, not fully disabled, but visibly disrupted, the signals between his brain and his muscles suddenly unreliable. His upper left arm dropped 3 inches, and his lower left hand opened involuntarily, fingers spreading wide. He pivoted, swinging his right arms in a wide sweep designed to catch Mara in the space behind him. She was not there. She had already moved, rolling low under the sweep and coming up on Torin's right flank. A precise kick landed on the back of his right knee joint, where the plating was thinnest and the structural support of his massive frame depended on a narrow band of tendon and cartilage. Torin's leg buckled. He caught himself on his lower right arm, pushing off the floor to stay upright, but his balance was broken, and the recovery cost him position. The fight was 90 seconds old. Torin roared. It was the deep, resonant sound that Makori produced when their combat hormones fully activated, a sound designed to freeze prey in place through sheer acoustic pressure. The arena walls vibrated. Several cadets in the lower tiers flinched backward in their seats. A Vili cadet in the front row covered both auditory organs and squeezed his eyes shut. Mara did not flinch. She did not react to the sound at all, as though it were background noise in a busy corridor, something that existed, acknowledged, and dismissed. She circled to Torin's left, staying in the zone where his weakened arms could not generate full force, her footwork so smooth that she seemed to glide across the arena surface. He swung at her with his upper right arm, a sweeping blow that carried his full mass behind it. She ducked it by bending at the waist, the arm passing over her head close enough to disturb her hair. He followed with a lower right hook that had enough force behind it to dent a structural panel. She stepped inside the arc, too close for the blow to land with full extension, and struck the same nerve cluster beneath his right forward arm that she had targeted on the left side. Both sets of arms went partially limp. His hands could still close, but the strength behind them was compromised. The connection between intent and execution degraded. He swung and missed. He grabbed and could not hold. Each movement was a fraction slower than the last, each recovery a fraction more effortful. Torin was fighting on instinct now, his training overwhelmed by frustration and the unfamiliar experience of losing. He lunged forward, abandoning technique entirely, trying to use his body mass to simply crash into her and crush her through sheer weight. It was desperation disguised as aggression, and Mara read it the moment he committed. She sidestepped, caught his leading wrist in both hands, and redirected his momentum. Torin's own charge carried him off balance, and Mara used the rotation to apply a joint lock to his wrist that hyperextended the tendons across the back of his hand. The technique was mechanical in its precision. She was not fighting him. She was disassembling him, using his own force, his own mass, his own momentum as tools against the structure they belonged to. He hit the floor, 300 kilograms of Makori warrior, driven to the composite surface by a technique that turned his greatest advantage into his undoing. Mara followed him down, maintaining the joint lock and adding a secondary hold on his shoulder that pinned his upper body flat against the arena floor. His free arms scraped against the surface, reaching for her, but she had positioned herself at the precise angle where none of his remaining limbs could generate the leverage needed to break the hold. "Submit," she said. Her voice was not strained. Her breathing was controlled, steady, unhurried. She spoke the word the way she spoke everything, with calm certainty, and nothing wasted. Torin held for 5 seconds, his plating ground against the floor, his teeth clenched hard enough that I could hear the sound from the upper tier, a grinding that vibrated through the structure of the arena itself. Then he tapped the floor with his lower right hand, the universal gesture across every combat tradition in the concordance. Submission. Sareth called the match. 3 minutes and 22 seconds. Mara released the holds in sequence, shoulder first, then wrist, each release controlled and deliberate. She stood, took 1 step back, and extended her hand to Torin. He did not take it. He lay on the arena floor for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, his chest heaving. Then he rolled to his side, pushed himself up with his lower arms, and walked off the floor without looking at her. Mara held the offered hand for 3 seconds. Then she withdrew it without expression, turned, nodded once to Sareth, and walked off the arena floor the same way she walked everywhere, unhurried, measured. As though what had just happened was neither triumph nor spectacle, but simply the completion of a task that needed completing. The arena was silent. 400 cadets from dozens of species sat in their seats and tried to process what they had witnessed. A first-year human cadet, half the size of her opponent, with no claws, no armor, no biological weapons of any kind, had dismantled the Academy's most physically dominant student in 3 minutes, using nothing but technique. Not strength, technique. She had not overpowered Torin. She had not matched his force with greater force. She had read his body like a structural diagram, identified every weakness in his frame, and exploited them in sequence with the precision of a surgeon and the calm of someone performing routine maintenance. Every strike had been placed exactly where it would cause the most disruption with the least effort. Every movement had been economical, nothing wasted, nothing theatrical. She had fought the way a mathematician solves an equation, reducing the problem step by step until the answer was inevitable. I looked at the cadets around me. Avili in the front row was staring at his own hands as though seeing them for the first time. A pair of Orani cadets were speaking in rapid whispers, their four legs tapping in the pattern their species used for urgent communication. Even Sevran, Torin's most loyal supporter, sat motionless with his silver-white face drained of its usual confidence. Then I looked at the instructors. That was where the real story was written. The cadets were stunned. The instructors were not. Not one of them showed surprise. Cole stood at the arena's edge with hands still clasped behind his back, and the instructor's expression had not changed once during the entire fight. Cole had known. They had all known. Every senior faculty member in this building had known what Mara could do, and they had allowed the match to proceed because the Academy needed to see it, because Torin needed to see it, because the Makori Dominion, watching through whatever intelligence feeds they maintained on this station, needed to see it. The fight had not been a contest. It had been a demonstration. Commandant Sol called a closed briefing that evening. Senior cadets and administrative staff were required to attend, which meant I was in the room by virtue of my gate log classification. We gathered in the secure conference hall on the command level, 30 cadets and a dozen faculty members seated around a curved table, while Sol stood at the head with a data display behind her. What I am about to share was declassified this morning by the Concordant Security Council, Sol said. It is being distributed simultaneously to every military academy, fleet command, and strategic planning division in Concordant space. You are receiving it because your commandant believes you should understand the nature of the species that has joined our ranks. She activated the display. A planet appeared. Blue oceans, green and brown landmasses, white cloud cover. Earth. Humanity does not have one military fleet, Sol said. They have 17. The number hung in the air. I heard someone inhale sharply 2 seats to my left. Severin, the Draelith who had been Torin's most vocal supporter, gripped the edge of the table with both hands. These 17 fleets are operated by separate political entities, called nation-states, which govern different regions of their homeworld. These nation-states cooperate with each other in some areas and compete aggressively in others. Their competition includes military competition. They develop weapons, strategies, and technologies in parallel, driven not by external threats, but by the constant pressure of rivals who share their own planet. Sol advanced the display. Fleet compositions appeared, ship silhouettes I did not recognize, accompanied by tonnage figures, crew complements, and operational range estimates. Their combined naval tonnage exceeds the Makori Dominion's entire fleet. She let that statement settle before continuing. The silence in the room was so complete that I could hear the ventilation system cycling air through the overhead ducts. Somewhere to my right, a Vethkai faculty member shifted in his seat, and the sound of his exoskeletal plates adjusting was as loud as a shout. Their species developed nuclear weaponry, devices capable of destroying entire cities, over 80 of their local years ago. They did not develop these weapons in response to an external threat. They developed them during a conflict with each other. They then spent the following decades building enough of these weapons to destroy their own planet multiple times over, not because they intended to use them, but because the threat of mutual destruction was itself a strategic tool. They invented a doctrine for this. They called it deterrence. Sol let that sink in. Their weapons technology is not superior to ours in most categories, but their tactical doctrine is among the most advanced we have ever encountered, because it has been refined through continuous application over an extraordinary timescale. Humanity's recorded history spans approximately 10,000 standard years. In that time, they have not experienced a single generation without armed conflict. Not one. They have fought each other with every weapon their technology could produce, across every terrain their planet offers, in every climate and condition, under every conceivable strategic circumstance. Their understanding of warfare is not theoretical. It is experiential, iterative, and relentless in its refinement. She paused. Her compound eyes moved across the room, settling briefly on each face. Every martial discipline that Cadet Ellison demonstrated in the training arena today is one of hundreds developed on Earth. Hundreds. They have codified, named, and systematized more forms of combat than most species have words for conflict. Their children begin competitive physical combat training as a recreational activity. They participate voluntarily, often eagerly. They have a word for it. They call it sports. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. I was not sure anyone in the room was breathing. Sol turned off the display. The planet disappeared, replaced by the concordant seal. Cadet Ellison is not their best, Sol said. She is not their brightest. She is not their most dangerous. She is, by her own assessment, and by the assessment of the human delegation that coordinated her placement, a representative of average capability for her age group. She paused again, and when she spoke, her voice was lower, carrying a weight that seemed to settle physically on the shoulders of everyone in the room. She is the one they judged safe enough to send. The briefing ended. Cadets filed out in silence. I saw Severin pass through the doorway with an expression I could only describe as the facial equivalent of a complete recalculation. Everything he had believed about the power structure of the galaxy had just been revised, and the new numbers did not balance the way they used to. I did not leave immediately. I sat in the briefing room as it emptied, alone with the concordant seal glowing on the display, and the echo of Solo's words filling the space between the walls. 17 fleets, 10,000 years of continuous conflict, combat training as recreation for children, and the quiet, unremarkable girl in the second row of my tactical theory lecture was their version of average. I found Mara on the observation deck that evening. She was standing at the viewport, looking out at the stars. The Macquarie frigate was still visible in the distance, but it had shifted position. It was pulling back, slowly, its running lights transitioning from active weapons standby to standard cruising pattern. Someone aboard that ship had received the same briefing, or something equivalent. The message had been received. I stood beside her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The stars turned beyond the viewport, and the frigate continued its slow withdrawal. I read the first contact report, I said. The one from the scout who surveyed your system 12 cycles ago. He called humanity a Tier 1 strategic concern. Mara nodded slowly. I know the report. He wrote that your species has perfected conflict. Does that bother you? The way the concordance sees you? She was quiet for a long time, and I did not rush her. Whatever she was composing in her mind, it was not a casual answer. It was something she had thought about before, perhaps many times, and she wanted to say it correctly. Every species that discovers us asks the same question, she said. They look at our history, and they see the wars, the weapons, the endless cycle of destruction and rebuilding, and they ask how we live with ourselves, how we sleep at night knowing what we are capable of. She turned to face me. In the starlight, her eyes were steady and clear, and I realized that what I had mistaken for calm all week was something different. It was resolve, the kind that does not need to announce itself because it has no interest in being performed. The answer is that we know exactly what we are. We have always known. We do not pretend to be peaceful. We do not claim that violence is foreign to our nature. We grew up on a world that tried to end us with ice ages, predators, plagues, and natural disasters, and we responded by becoming the most adaptable, most persistent, most stubbornly enduring species our planet ever produced. We turned every threat into a lesson, and every lesson into a tool. She looked back at the stars. But knowing what you are is not the same as being ruled by it. The question was never whether we were dangerous. Every species that looks at our file knows we are dangerous. The question was whether we could be trusted. Whether the thing that makes us formidable could also make us reliable. Whether the same drive that pushed us to fight each other for 10,000 years could be redirected toward something that mattered more than winning. Is that why you are here? I asked. To prove that you can be trusted? I am here to prove that we can stop, Mara said. Not that we lack the ability to fight. Everyone already knows that. I am here to prove that we can choose not to. That the same will that makes us dangerous also makes us disciplined. That we can walk into a room full of species who fear us, and sit down, take notes, answer questions, and offer a hand to someone who tried to break us. Because the choice to be measured is harder than the choice to be violent, and we have always preferred the harder path. I thought about Torin on the arena floor. I thought about Mara's hand, extended, offered, and refused. I thought about 6 ships, invisible and silent, holding position around this station without sending a single threatening transmission. I thought about a species that had mastered every form of combat their world could produce, and chose to send a single girl to an academy instead of a fleet to a border. "You offered Torin your hand," I said. After the match, "He did not take it." "He will next time," Mara said. There was no arrogance in her voice, just certainty. The quiet, patient certainty of someone who understood that trust was not won in a single gesture, but built over 1,000 small choices, each one harder than the last. I returned to my quarters that night. The station was quiet. The Makori frigate had completed its withdrawal, its running lights disappearing into the dark between stars. Somewhere beyond the range of our deliberately narrowed sensors, 6 human ships continued their silent vigil, unseen and unannounced, a reminder that power did not require performance. I sat at my desk for a long time before opening my terminal. I thought about the week that had just passed, and everything it had rearranged inside my understanding of the galaxy. 7 days ago, I had been a forgettable second-year cadet with a talent for invisibility and no particular opinions about anything beyond my next assignment. Now I had watched an instructor run. I had watched a bully fall. I had watched 400 cadets sit in stunned silence, while a girl half their size walked away from a fight she had ended in 3 minutes. And I had heard a commandant describe a species that terrified the most powerful governing body in the galaxy, not because of what it could destroy, but because of how long it had been practicing. I opened my gate log from the first day. The entry was still there, unchanged. Cadet Mara Ellison. Species, human. Clearance, level directed mission. I added a personal annotation beneath it. It was not an official note. It would never appear in any academy record, any concordance file, any database that anyone of importance would ever review. It was mine. A single line written for myself, because I needed to put into words the thing I had spent the past week learning. First human I have ever met. Watched her take a hit, win a fight, and offer a hand to the person who lost, all in the same breath. If this is what Earth sends when it is being gentle, I pray I never see what it sends when it is not. I closed the terminal and turned off the light. Outside my window, the stars continued their slow rotation, indifferent and ancient. Somewhere among them, a small blue world orbited a small yellow star, and on that world, a species that had spent 10,000 years at war with itself was learning, one choice at a time, to aim its strength at the darkness instead. I closed my eyes and slept better than I had in weeks, not because the galaxy was safe, it had never been safe, but for the first time, I believed it might be in good hands.